Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana Live. I hope you're extremely well. It's the start of another week and we have the next in our series, as promised, of our shows and videos focused on the UK CAA. Tonight, we're going to be joined by a panel of guests to discuss the current state of UK drones. This will cover all use cases, categories and certification type. The aim is really to provide an updated point of view about where we stand, the problems we face, and potentially, who knows, even a few solutions. This is an opinion-based show, so please keep in mind that everything that you're going to hear tonight is the opinion of that person and does not reflect the opinion of other guests or Geeksvana or anybody else. Also, you will likely see me interrupting our guests this evening. Please forgive me for this. We'll be attempting to keep the conversation on track and interject with questions and points where necessary. This is designed to keep everything flowing and ensure the show is not 3 hours long. We have to obviously keep Matt Williams awake tonight for sure. I suspect we could put this panel together and eat up an evening without even breaking a sweat. So it's really just designed to try and keep us on track. During the show, I'll be bringing up certain topics and invite people from the panel to comment on them. Then the rest of the panel will be provided with an opportunity to respond to the comments made. For those watching who are watching live, if you've got any questions or comments, please do tag at Geeksvana. And we'll be, although we'll be focusing on the opinion of the panel this evening, we will be doing a follow-up with your comments and questions, which will be produced in the future. So please, if you're watching the replay of this as well, do let us know your thoughts in the comments. So let's introduce our panel, shall we, and get to the topics. First up, we're joined by our regular co-host, Graham Degg. He will be providing his views and thoughts in a similar way to our guest this evening, so it'll be good fun for him to play that role. Our first guest is known to channel viewers as Mr. MPW, the man who founded and ran the UK's largest drone training company, Matt Williams. You will also likely know our second guest, if you're a regular viewer, Richard Ryan, who has been kind enough to join us on the channel recently. Richard is a barrister in England and Wales and specialises in the world of drones. You can find a link to his chambers in the description below. I wholeheartedly recommend having that in your contact list. And our third guest has appeared on the channel before, but at that stage he was being interviewed by Geeksvana as a senior member within the RPAS team at the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Now working in the private sector within the industry, his experience nicely completes the panel this evening, I feel. So it brings together a very nice cross mix of everybody. So on that note, we will bring the panel in. Hello, everybody. How are we all? Excellent. Mark, thank you for joining us for your first live appearance. We've obviously had a pre-recorded interview with you previously, but yeah, thanks very much for joining us. Excellent. Okay, so we will jump in with the first topic, and this is actually one that came up in the pre-show chat, and it's kind of also a little bit of an update in terms of the CAA. They have obviously sent out an email today and also put out an update on the future flight side of things.
Sorry, Sean.
Yeah.
Chat saying no audio on guests.
Yes, thank you. There will be now. Thank you for that. We're actually, just so everybody knows, in the chat, I've just spent a few minutes setting it up. Actually, we're using a slightly different system to bring the guests in due to a technical problem, which means I have to mute them. But yes, it means the audio has to be turned on by the very professional host that never makes errors. So yes, this update came in, which basically from the CAA stated that we've noted a small number of concerns from industry about the impact of SORA on PDR-AO1. Effectively, what they're saying here is that there will be no impact on PDR-AO1 until the 31st of March 2026, and they'll consult before they make any changes. Now, we obviously have that had a little bit of a ripple in terms of people wondering if that means SORA is delayed, but actually it isn't. It's in the same future flight update, they've stated that looking forward to 2025, as part of the continued work on future flight in Q1 2025, the CAA intends to publish responses, and there will be SORA, as with UK SORA applications, available on the DISCO or DUSCO, as they've now removed the I, online application tool from late Q1, early Q2 2025. So the actual process, the actual UK SORA system isn't delayed. It's just actually what they're saying is they're going to be leaving PDRA alone until at least March 2026. Now, this is an interesting one because it's obviously the chap that's sitting in a slightly different place this evening over here, Gray, and this has been an interesting one from the point of view that how SORA will impact PDRA and how any of that kind of side of things is going to be interesting, isn't it? Because of course we're talking there about things like potentially losing the bubble or overflight if we ever technically had it in the first place. It's going to be an interesting one, isn't it?
That's certainly the rumor, isn't it? And I mean, you see that note, a small number of operators sort of mention stuff in the consultation. Well, it will be a small number because it will only be a small number who understand that light at the end of the tunnel is a train heading towards them.
Yeah, there's also probably
potentially
there is only a small number there at the moment, but yes, I mean this, Mark, as somebody who's obviously recently worked within the CAA system, obviously within RPAS. The whole side of things in terms of the PDRA moving across to the SORA methodology and the overflight side of things, does this seem to be as much of a hot topic internally or certainly from a policy point of view as for those looking in? This seems to be one of the big issues that's been present within PDRA recently.
Yes, with the proviso that it's now over a year since I left. I can only comment on what things were like back then, of course, but PDRA 1 has always been quite a hot topic in that sense. And one of the problems with PDRA 1 really is that it had quite an interesting gestation, I suppose, because it was always a little bit of, not a sticking plaster approach, I suppose, but it was always designed to make sure that people who had a permission for aerial work, then a permission for commercial operations, had that degree of continuity. And I think it's clear that that's what they're going for already. They're trying their best to make sure that there's going to be a degree of continuity for existing PDRA 1 holders. So there won't be, Graham's train at the end of the tunnel can at least be delayed by a little while, if nothing else. But because it's been adapted from what was there previously, it's going to be quite difficult for them to make it fit into SORA, I think. You only need to look at the EASA PDRAs and standard scenarios developed under SORA to see that there's nothing really like UK PDRA 1. So I'm quite uncertain about its future.
Yes, and actually, if you look at a lot of the consultations regarding training and really any of the conversations around SORA, PDRA system and even the GVC system seems to be something which just is, in actual fact, when GVC was raised as an issue with the training consultation, it was then obviously added in as saying, okay, we are listening, perhaps we can consider keeping a lower end of it there, because of course it doesn't fit within the wider scheme of managing to evolve things. But this would obviously cause to remove the bubble as standard from PDRA 01 for the existing use case flyers, so the people who are currently earning a living and actually flying within the specific category. That would be a major issue that to be able to regain that is going to cost them a lot of money under a SORA application, wouldn't it? Potentially.
I suppose it would if they had to do something completely separate. I think for whatever replaces PDRA 1 in the future under a SORA model, the CA would be wise, and I'm sure that some people there are thinking about this, to look at the output from PDRA 1 operators. Not what does the PDRA allow you to do, but what use cases are actually put into use through it, and then try to design PDRAs, even if it's multiple PDRAs, that still allow those objectives to be carried out. Now, you can argue day in, day out about should we be 50 meters or 30 meters clear of individuals? Should it be horizontal or a cylinder or a dome or anything like that? But all you're doing is trying to achieve a particular objective. Now, ground risk in SORA is based much more on probability, because you're talking about population densities and how likely you are to encounter somebody. So at least in a city centre, you don't have to track dozens of people, all with simulated circles around them or something along those lines. So I don't think it's necessarily a disaster coming yet, but I completely understand the feeling of change is coming, and yes, it could be quite difficult as everybody adopts whatever the replacement is.
Because there is always, of course, the argument, and we've seen it on different FOIs and different bits and pieces here and there, where overflight wasn't necessarily ever supposed to be something even within PDRA, and it sort of became a thing, or almost kind of grandfathered in from that point of view. But it's something which obviously for the existing user base is a real concern, and
Yes.
my concern is that when we're not looking after that user base enough at the moment, bearing in mind, of course, they are the existing fee payers. They are the people that are very much the foundation of the industry. And actually, for any business, for anybody that's looking to expand their business, that's looking to invest, that's looking to put money in, how do they justify that when they know something is coming down the line? Great, it's confirmed there will be no changes until March 2026, but that in business terms, of course, isn't very long, and it does kind of almost, in my opinion, it kind of almost makes it a little bit worse because it puts it into the short to medium term issue, and again, it makes it very difficult for people to be able to plan their businesses. Does anybody else want to say anything on this? Yeah,
I'll jump in, Sean. I mean, I go back to the PFCO piece, and when they made the transition to PDRA1, there was a 3-year time limit on it. So you talk about a base of operators which are foundational to the way that the drone industry was evolving. It was right there. But that period of time, that 3 years, and the increased burden of regulation, and you'd have seen a massive drop-off in those PFCO holders renewing or going on to PDRA1. So what we've now got is precedent in history, and here Mark was talking about them doing something similar in terms of keeping it going for a little while, but not for that long. So my question is, what are the CAA going to do to ensure that those PDRA01 holders still maintain it? We talk about grandfather rights. That's a legacy system in any other industry. So those PFCO holders should still be able to grandfather those rights all the way through to whatever evolves, because we're going to have to be on top of the regulation anyway. And so what you've got is a real, you've got 6 or 7 years worth of experience flying drones and operating with customers, getting used to regulation, earning money, putting bread on the table, all of those things. And suddenly the CAA has left you out cold and hanging. For me, that is an issue which should be rectified if they're going to do it again. And to Mark's point about PRAs, the EU have already set a good precedent around what the objectives are for each one. When we look at what they've got coming down the road for power lines in the UK, the French have been doing that for years, absolutely years under the PDRA scheme. So why is it now, years later, again, are we now thinking, how do we adapt to PDRA for an objective flight, whatever it may be, or whatever business case it's going to be used for, so late? This is what I don't understand. And I have real difficulty in trying to understand the logic of the CAA when it comes to matters like this. And then we get into SORA. So let's just talk about SORA right now. Sorry, and I know Matt will probably want to jump in very quickly on 2.5. 2.5 has been ratified. So the EU now have been living and breathing SORA for so long that they're going to switch straight into 2.5 with little friction. And here we've got a massive hurdle to jump with respect to compliance. When you look at 2.5 and what went before it, that evolved over time. So a lot of European operators would have got very much used to this frame of working, whereas in the UK we simply haven't. I'll turn it over.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. I always think as well in terms of our sort of lag behind the EU. In terms of looking at the timeline, which will come up later as well within another one of the topics. But when you look at it from the point of view of 2019, we're staying in EASA, 11th hour, we're coming out of EASA and we're adopting EU rules, and then suddenly, of course, EU rules are now going to be adopted to suit the UK, and it's going to be UK SORA, etc., etc. That feels like a lot of change that isn't necessarily within the regulators' control that would delay a lot of that kind of thing happening. And it's very unusual to have a mirrored system of regulation in another another airspace to be able to sort of level progress against as well, I think. So it's a really interesting one.
But we are a Commonwealth system, Sean.
We are.
So Commonwealth law
Yeah.
is adopted in Australia, South Africa, to a degree India, Singapore. It's in other jurisdictions. So we are familiar with the way that the law is adopted in other jurisdictions, right?
Yes.
And similarly, we've had years of the same in the EU, where we were in the EU. 20 years of that.
No, indeed.
So it shouldn't be a complete stranger to
No,
the CAA.
Indeed. Matt, did you want to add anything on the this particular discussion on SORA?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right? So I can see the people in the chat talking, saying, "Oh, it's not a very viewer-friendly stream potentially, because we're talking using all these acronyms." And I'm sorry for that. That is unfortunately the nature of a conversation like this, in a way, because we're talking about the regulator and some very important underlying concepts that actually are the basis of what we are all going to be able to operate under, whether we are in the recreational world or the commercial world or small drones or large drones. This is the overarching, I suppose, framework, if you like, that we're talking about. So if SORA and PDRAs and all of that stuff doesn't mean anything to you, what I would say is don't worry about it too much, because if it doesn't mean anything to you right now, it probably doesn't affect you too much.
Yes.
The people who and that's
there are also topics
people who don't know what we're on about. That's not what I'm trying to say, but
no, indeed,
they're very, very deep things that and
here on Geeksvana we touch every level. So there are videos, there are live streams touching on the basics all the way through to these more advanced ones. But actually, some of the other topics coming up are very straightforward in terms of understanding what at whatever level you are. But yes, sometimes we do have to skip past the explanations of those just because it would take too long for these kind of particularly advanced discussions within this space. I know it's a great point. Thank you, Matt. And in actual fact, did you have anything on SORA specifically to state?
Not specifically, but it's the whole kind of, again, the fundamentals behind the conversation I think we're trying to have this evening in front of everybody with the people that we've got here. The problem that we've had since the very beginning of the kind of inception of the permission for aerial work as it was, and actually before that, before anything existed officially, and then we had permission for aerial work, permission for commercial operation. Now we're into the PDRA world.
Indeed.
We're moving on from that potentially into something else. The biggest issue is that as in the UK, we were so far ahead in terms of gripping this problem and realizing that drones and unmanned aircraft were coming. We had a framework that the rest of the world genuinely looked to say, oh, they're already doing it. How do we do it? When we first started, I mean, we were flying model helicopters with cameras on. We started in 2008. We actually told the CAA we were starting to do it in 2010 when we'd already been doing it for a while and got in a bit of trouble with them. But nothing existed at the time. There was no framework for us, and that was the same pretty much worldwide. But the big issue is that the constant changing of all of these different frameworks, which are hard enough for us as experts to keep up with, are almost impossible, I think, for people who aren't living, drinking, breathing it all day, every day to actually stay up to date with.
Absolutely.
And the biggest problem that creates, aside from the business impacts and all that sort of stuff, which I've certainly felt, and I know other people here have probably felt as well, is that it's the safety element that we then start to degrade, in my mind. Like, we worked very hard, I worked very hard. The Mr. MPW thing came out because I spent a year before EASA, before we were supposed to adopt the EASA guidelines, trying to teach everybody and walk everybody through the PDRA system. And I think we got a good grip on that, to the point that the CAA used to use some of that training internally, from what we've been told. But now we're into a place where it almost seems as though the political, potentially kind of the puppet strings get pulled, and unfortunately the CAA seem to have to deal with that in the middle, and everything keeps changing. And the worst part of that for me as an aviator with colleagues and friends, like Mark, who are still flying around at low level, is that rules become so difficult to understand for even us that people just go, do you know what? Whatever, I'm just going to fly.
Yeah.
And if I get caught, I get caught.
Yeah.
Well, we
And
see that
is
more
the
and more.
reality of where we are.
Yeah,
It's
and
crazy.
I live in the land of Facebook a lot of the time, probably too much time. And
brave man.
The concept of whatever you fly, it should be fairly simple because you'll understand what the rules are for what you fly. But just hasn't worked. People don't understand what the rules is, what they fly. The other day, somebody's just done their A2C of C, and we're talking about a 30-meter clearance. Now, where did that come from? That came from the rules that we can't use because we haven't got C-class drones. Just being taught that. It's this is we haven't got a user base that catches on really quickly to this stuff. Do you know why? Because they're busy. They're busy going out trying to put food on the table. They are not busy looking at every document that comes from the CAA, reading it in infinite detail to see if it makes sense to them and see if it impacts what they're doing.
It's interesting actually because the next new topic which I added after the run order I sent out to everybody was actually titled "Too Much Advice." And this is basically talking about how I feel there are too many levels of regulation and advice, and actually that ends up causing confusion, and that ends up causing confusion to the sub 250 gram drone flyer in terms of VLOS and having to know the orientation of their mini drone and keeping it within like 70 meters, etc., all the way through to the same AMCGM issues and confusion that causes with OA holders and even OSC flyers, etc. And there are so many people at every level who turn around and say, okay, I've got this advice, I've got this guidance, then there's legislation. Where am I actually supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing to ensure that I'm being safe and that I'm being that I'm operating legally as well? And things like, in my opinion, AMCGM focus more on covering the regulator, so that the regulator can say, we have something, we advised people against flying their mini drones too far, so it's not our fault, gov, than actually necessarily creating a fair and workable regulations. What's your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah. There's not much. I mean, there really isn't much to say on it, right? Because
at the moment we have legislation, we have CAP documents, and then suddenly we've got this whole other thing which is now, of course, gone through consultation. It's now legally in there as the AMCGM, and then we even had that sort of middle stage where it was very difficult to get the CAA to tell us in terms of hobby or professional user, which is it? Is it 722 or is it AMCGM? And then there was the period where AMCGM was going to take over 722, etc. And then actually the lots of emails and lots of comms coming across to Geeksvana saying actually AMCGM is guidance, so take it as such. And to me, that's when you start to lose a large amount of the audience. If you look at the video that we had out that talked about the VLOS side of things with AMCGM and talking about the fact that their guidance is now for orientation, the amount of, I mean, there are thousands of comments and tens of thousands of views, and the amount of comments of people that were saying, I followed the rules for such a long time, but I'm done. I'm just going to fly safely and with common sense, and I just can't keep up. This is just getting ridiculous. And when you start to lose people because there are too many levels of regulation and guidance, to me that starts to say, okay, the regulator's not doing their job. They're not regulating anymore because they're confusing people out of it. Basically, it's a huge frustration.
But that's it, right? And to the point you were making before, there seems like there were kind of two fundamental turning points, I think, and when everything started to become really confusing. We used to have effectively two articles in the air navigation order that governed what we could and couldn't do, which was fairly sensible. And funny old things, drones then actually were quite unreliable. They were quite a bit larger and more dynamic than they are now to achieve the same effect. And when we took that very simple concept and added an extra word to it, or two extra words, which was commercial operation. And when we removed that commercial operation ticket from it, and I know you can't necessarily turn the wheel back, that is when it all of a sudden became totally, it was layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And actually, Mark's flown tornadoes around at low level in the military, right? Same airspace as us. It was less confusing to read through the military low flying documentation and understand what you could and couldn't do at 450, 540, however many knots at 150 feet in an operational low flying area than it is to get drones in the air now. I would say, because there are so many different things you have to look at.
Are you suggesting that the amount of regulation is not proportionate to the risk?
100%. Yeah, and we've been saying that for a long time. And then the key thing then that undid all of that was, if I am brutally honest, the lack of communication from the regulator, and that was exacerbated by them then putting out effectively. And I know this isn't the legal parlance, Richard can correct me on this, but effectively cease and desists on people who are trying to call them out and say, look, guys, you're not doing this well or right. It's not helpful. Can we do it a different way? No, we don't want to hear from you. So it's very tricky, and I don't envy people coming into it now or who've been in it and are trying to keep going. It's very
I think
tough.
what underlines this, from my experience with the CAA, is that the key message from within the CAA is, we're not here to give advice. We are the regulator. And I'm sure, Mark, you would have seen this in your experience and would have been told it a number of times. When people phone up and say, my BV loss operational authorization's got a number of questions to it. How do you suggest I answer these? Sorry, we can't give you advice. So commercial operators are left hanging in the wind slightly there, because CAA won't give advice, and yet somebody who needs an operational authorization doesn't know what it is that the CAA is actually asking for in order to properly delineate their position on their operational authorization to get it authorized, right? And so what you've now got is a commercial impact on somebody that wants to do drone light shows, for example, who can't. And they're waiting on a decision because the CAA won't give advice, but their position is not clear because of conflicting documentation that they're relying on, and that's a real fundamental issue.
It is, and I do see evidence. It's in a future video coming up actually that is also, there is a variance there in terms of choosing my words very carefully until we've legally cleared the script for that particular video. But there does seem to be a variance as well in terms of size of company, or size of operator, in terms of financial reach, in terms of size of company, in terms of actually the feedback that you can and can't gain from the CAA when attempting to get that kind of advice as well. So nothing seems to be even, and to me it's always been a frustration that I've expressed many times to Graham, that you almost feel as well that you can get different advice with the same question depending on who answers an email or who picks up a telephone, and to me, for something that should be based on standard operating procedures, it's very frustrating. Mark, as somebody who's just come out of that or recently come out of that world, a year-ish, do you feel at the moment the UK is under too many layers, UK drones are under too many layers of regulation, from the point of view that we have the drone code, the AMCGM, Cap 722, and then legislation? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that most people from my sort of background would admit that these are fair criticisms that have been leveled so far. There was undoubtedly a period of time where, no matter how clearly you had asked me, I probably couldn't have told you the exact legal status of Cap 722 at the point when AMC and GM was being developed and the new regulations had already come into force. So was it guidance? Was it legally binding? And what approach should people necessarily take? Now, part of that is because we're in a situation here where the UK is trying to develop its own system and adhere to those principles that Matt pointed out, where we were world leading in this. We did have a superb framework for it, and we've undoubtedly had peaks as well as troughs in how regulation has worked. But the size of the UK's submission to this is tiny compared to EASA and what they're able to do in Europe. The sheer size of policy departments, for example, would dwarf anything that could be sensibly developed in the UK, which makes producing things much more challenging. So everything's been very iterative. So I think developing AMC to the UAS implementing regulation, but without a clear plan yet of how CAP 722 and its information would either be incorporated or subsequently removed, and not being able to communicate that well either, just adds to all these sort of difficulties.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that feedback from somebody who's obviously worked within regulation recently, from the point of view that that's exactly the feeling that I always get back whenever we ask questions, whenever we ask for guidance ourselves as a journalist, saying, okay, I want to put this video together. Where do we stand on this? I still remember the roller coaster that AMC GM was in those first few weeks when we had Callum Holland on from the CAA, who kindly came on to give us some interviews surrounding all of that. And within that 1 week, we went from AMC GM being the absolute law that you should effectively be following, a legal definition, through to actually it's just guidance gov at the end of that week. So to me, that isn't the level of competence that I would want to see from a regulator. For a regulator to be able to turn around and say they don't know in terms of legal definitions of documents and that type of thing. Well, if 722 is unsure as far as how that works moving forward, then surely the position is not to put out consultation and to bring in an AMC GM to provide yet more confusion when the existing documents are already providing that. If it was a case of wanting to kill off 722 and replace it with AMC, then do that, etc., which obviously I know would have been extremely difficult, etc. But it's just the level of confusion. And as I say, it's not as if we see it just within professional operators with OAs and who are trying to decide for AMC GM. We see it in terms of turning away the new people coming into the industry, who I would argue it is more likely that a hobbyist drone pilot is going to cause headline grabbing problems with their drone than necessarily a professional operator who's gone through the GVC, who's got an OA and operates to an operations manual. There's good and bad in every level, of course, but certainly statistically you're more likely to have that. And to me, it's just been very, very frustrating, as Matt said, from the point of view that we've both done a job to try and communicate out to people how they should be interpreting these things and actually how they should be flying safely. It almost feels like a bit of a slap in the face when it's constantly interpretations change, even from the airspace regulator. I think it just feels like there are too many levels, and it's bad enough that there's already the drone code, and actually there's things in the drone code that don't stand up under legislation and that type of thing, which is already a very strange thing. We actually went to create a video which was a drone code explainer for 2025, and we can't make it because there are statements within the drone code that I cannot justify telling my audience based on the legislation surrounding that. And that to me just feels like a really terrible place to be sat in. What are your thoughts, Graham?
Well, it's not like we haven't had a go at getting the drone code changed, is it?
Yes.
Over the last couple of years, we sort of pushed back and got some changes to it. But the level of complexity is at the moment ludicrous, and with the almost as soon as you've got your head around what's coming in now, there is always the next thing on the horizon, and it sort of makes the whole area uninvestable. So if you go into drones, you go in with your eyes shut, otherwise you won't go in. You go in with your eyes open and look at what's coming and what may change and what those changes may be and what that may cost you, then you'd walk away. I've had a chance over the last couple of years to invest in 2 drone businesses. I haven't. I've just not done it because I know that change is too constant and that leaves it too uncertain.
Yeah, which is obviously the very opposite of what a regulator that is also part of their mandate is to help growth. Yeah. It just feels so alien to that concept, and it feels alien to the concept in terms of when I first got into this, in terms of reporting on regulation, etc. It really felt like there was a strong push towards the right side of the road, as it were, from the point of view of trying to get good, fair regulation happening. Mark, do you have any thoughts in terms of where that went wrong, in terms of where did that, I would say 2019, 2020, I was full of hope. And I felt like there was a direction. Lots of parts of it, different people didn't agree with, etc. But we had a direction, we had a focus in terms of what could happen to the drone regulation in the UK. But we seem to have lost that completely. We seem to be in this strange, almost sort of apocalyptic wasteland. Where do you think that went wrong in your, if you think it went wrong to that extent?
I think it definitely had a lot of missteps. Things did go wrong because we're having this sort of discussion now. And as you say, this wasn't the case back in around 2019, where, okay, you would have somebody, I was teaching on an NQE at that sort of point. And yes, you'd have some people who were confused around the air law lectures and they wanted to really look into the legal detail of what they were allowed to do. But as Matt's pointed out, you had 2 articles in the air navigation order, and that's really all you needed to worry about at that stage. And there was the occasional safety notice or additional piece of information that came out there. So I think that the legislation that came in at the end of 2020 to bring us effectively in line with the EU fundamentally is quite simple when you nail down individual articles and you look at individual things that matter to you as a commercial operator or as somebody writing a safety case. But then there was so much stuff around it and so many things in the annexes and a completely different approach there. I think it just became overwhelming. We wound up perhaps in the situation where at that stage, UAS was not necessarily a huge area of the CAA. We had all seen the projections. We all knew how large this industry was going to become, how important it was, and what a large part of aviation it was destined to be. But it's undoubted that in lots of regulators around the world, before 2020 onwards, really, UAS was maybe the poor cousin. Some places weren't sure how to regulate it, where to package it in, if to regulate it. And there are still nations out there where there's de facto bans in place. So they're not really sure what to do. So I think it was very difficult to take a relatively small area of the CAA at that point and try to develop what was quite a serious, large bit of regulation and make that entirely understandable.
Can I put a date on it? You asked when it all went a little bit pear-shaped, Sean.
Okay.
7th of December 2022.
Okay.
Remember that day? That was the day when there's a whole load of CAP 722 documents came out. Some of them were even right, but some of them weren't.
Yes.
But it's that at that day that or CAP 722A came out, version 2, and the implementation of that caused an awful lot of operators, an awful lot of problems to the extent that some of them still haven't recovered. And that's going for the sort of OAs, the OSCs, the sort of thing that we'd be talking about going for SORAs now, or SORA-based OAs now. That caused problems for a whole bunch.
That was definitely one of the times. Yes. Just as a side note, I think we might be picking you up on the incorrect microphone at the moment because we're getting people in the chat saying, "Could you turn your squelch up?" So I'm not sure if you're coming through on the Elgato or not. Just so you are aware.
While I mess around.
Yes.
I think for me, Sean, when the regulation changed around, I think 2016-17, and it was Article 94 and 95, I think. And it was separated out from A to G. And I can't specifically recall exactly what it was for, but I do remember that happening. And for me, I thought, this is going to be interesting because this is actually starting to make things complicated. And I think from there, we have evolved. Clearly we've got primary legislation. So for everybody on who's watching, primary legislation will be a Civil Aviation Act, secondary legislation and regulations. That'll be around the air navigation order. And then sitting around that, you'll have other regulations. And then what supplements those regulations is supposed to be guidance. What we've got, as Mark said, is a lot of guidance around those changes that we've seen, predominantly in secondary legislation and some primary legislation. I worked with some members of the House of Lords when the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act became law, which gave the police a whole load of superpowers in my book. And I worked with the House of Lords then, some members of them, as that was being passed through Parliament, to actually segregate out of the legislation those commercial operators. Because you can have a police officer that would come in, take your equipment, and then you've got nothing to earn money from, and to get your equipment back, you potentially would have to go to the Crown Court and ask for it to be given back to you weeks later, when you could have a drone job the next morning, and suddenly you've now lost a client, right? But that clearly didn't happen. We didn't manage to make that work. But the legislation for me started to get more complex from that, as early as that, from that point.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw that.
I mean, and there are quite a few dates in there from all of us. Matt, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So again, this is kind of trying to just boil down what everyone's talking about and what's gone on over the years. We went from Article 166 and 167, 2 articles, and you had to bear in mind an article called 241 all the time while you were flying, to 94, 95, as Richard just said, which then broke it down even further. 166 and 167 were essentially the recreational and commercial guidelines. You had another article you had to comply with if you wanted to do commercial stuff. That then rolled over into 94 and 95, but made them much more detailed. And I think that was actually fairly sensible when you understood it, because it gave you a little bit more guidance as the rules were evolving. The big one for me is what I think is worth picking up on, and a couple of things that Mark said then that were really interesting. And when you put it into context of, we're saying that the UK is small, we don't have the resources that we have within that EASA have available to them, that other countries have available to them, all very true. So here's the question: in that case then, why are we overcomplicating or over-regulating the airspace if we don't have the resources to do so? Why didn't we just stay with the original systems that worked? And actually, I think were proven to be safe, because there is no evidence that they needed to be changed, because there weren't any major accidents or incidents. There were a couple that, if you're in the circles, I think about, but nothing major, or certainly that was on the grand scheme, was going to cause a problem. So the question is, if we haven't got the resources, and bear in mind, there are other countries out there some who do have the resources, but a lot that don't, that have since 2020. It's no excuse to say, oh yeah, the rules have changed, we're trying to keep up with the ASA, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to, is the big thing, because that's the whole point of Brexit and taking everything back, was that we should have the power to do what we want. And when you go from, when you go from Canada, for example, where I am right now, it's a very small unmanned department, the RPAS department here, very small. But in the last year, they have enabled BVLOS. They're now doing pipeline inspections, power line inspections, all sorts of different inspections, a very long way away from the origination point. They're doing complex automated drone deliveries and things like that now. That's come from a very small team with very little resources, and that isn't a one-off, right?
Well, so no. But you also have to look at it from the point of view, and this is another question that I will throw back at Mark in terms of being somebody who's worked for a regulator, and to get his personal opinion on it. He may or may not answer it, but actually there has been a lot of funding in the UK, in my opinion. There has been millions of pounds that have come into the unmanned space, but it perhaps has been focused too heavily in future flight, in my opinion. We went from I remember sitting in a DroneX talk that Mark gave, talking about the fact that they need more people. That one of the things that is urgently needed within the RPAS regulatory world in the UK was man hours, was with people to process and to be able to bring new regulation and bring something forward. We then kind of jumped forward suddenly, and in my last press briefing with the CAA, we were shown a chart of the existing FS&I department as it's now become, and it was this maze of desks and people, and the network of people involved was incredible. But actually, when you looked at it and focused in, the desks, there were probably still only 2 or 3 desks that were the traditional RPAS inner workings as I used to recognize them. So Mark, would you say that part of this, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it's more a very specific question, would you say that the investment that has happened has potentially happened in the wrong place, and that we have been chasing future flight? Or is that just the way that it looks from somebody on the outside who is obviously more unmanned than future flight?
Well, I think that the people on the outside are the people whose views matter in this situation here. Depending on whose numbers you look at, there has been money from tax receipts, effectively, through the Department for Transport into the tens of millions, probably something between 10 and 23 million, I think, was put in for future flight in general.
Wow.
And a lot of that went into the restructuring and the development of the Future Safety and Innovation Department. So there's a lot of posts there that must be funded by future flight. And it's right for us in industry to be able to ask, what have we got out of that? What have we actually received? And I think that one thing that I see an awful lot of is that now we get a lot of strategic information. We see a lot of briefings at various forums, lots of action groups and things like that, where we can see future roadmaps. We can see the various pathways that are being developed. There's lots of wiring diagrams and things like that. But there's still not a great deal of operationally angled experience there. There's not a lot of people across those various FSI areas who have flown something at the levels that we want to talk about here, who have had to earn a living from operating aircraft that we're all discussing. So the problem there is that there's the real core of people there who know what it's like on the outside is still vanishingly small. And I think when you look at the continuity they've had as well, the area that most people will have customer-facing interactions with, who are responsible for processing your applications, for conducting oversight, and for stamping your authorizations when they finally come out, has suffered a lot of turnover. You know, I've been out a little bit over a year now, and the vast majority of my ex-colleagues appear to have moved on for reasons various. So a lot of throughput there. So while there maybe there are more people in that team now, maybe it's still the same sort of number, but there's been so much dilution through them that virtually everybody there appears to be relatively new. So you're at the stage where I guess even relatively inexperienced people there are now the ones trying to provide training. And I've worked with some other people recently in the industry who have asked me to look at oversight reports that have been sent out to them to ask me, well, how do you think we should answer this? How do you think we should treat this particular thing? And I find them very difficult to read and understand. And that's as somebody who used to be quite senior in one of the teams that produced these things. I know they have guidance on how to write oversight reports and how to write findings because I wrote that guidance. So
yes.
Maybe it's been changed, maybe it's been adjusted, or maybe it's been lost in a filing cupboard somewhere, but that experience is there somewhere. But there's so much dilution in it now, and the wider aspects of FS&I, the technical strategy areas, the policy areas, design and certification, of course, are all focused on very, very different things. And the area that actually provides direct customer output that directly affects us in industry today is particularly small.
And which provides this.
Yeah, I mean, is that a symptom of the fact of where we find ourselves now? Because that is that's the feeling I'm left with in terms of the statutory charges consultation. Suddenly, the figure jumping up to over £500. When I again look at the graph of all the desks that now exist within FS&I, and I look at actually how many of those are bringing fees in on a regular basis, and it comes back to it's almost the old RPAS departments desks with a bit of expansion paying for the rest of the department. So then I think, okay, well, no wonder that it has to go up. But actually, why should, if FS&I isn't bringing the fees in yet, then surely that's the answer. Curtail that department and bring it back to a more RPAS focus and allow industry to, because I do feel a lot as well with FS&I at the moment, they're almost telling us what the industry will want rather than necessarily adapting to and actually growing with the innovation, which I do find extremely frustrating. And sorry, I interrupted you, Richard.
That's okay. I mean, Mark, I don't think much has changed. From my knowledge of the CAA, when I was working with the CAA, one of the first things I said was I was the only person that flew drones. I said, why hasn't everybody else? I said that you should make it compulsory for everybody in the team to go away and do a PFCO or GVC or whatever it is and get that experience. And it clearly hasn't happened. So that fell on deaf ears. The other point I'd just like to bring in, I mean, we're talking about resources as well, is on the SORA 2.5, if you look at any EU document around SORA, it will tell you who all the people were that were involved in putting that document together. And there were actually 2 people from the CAA in the UK that were part of that working group. So this SORA is no strange beast to the CAA. They've had this knowledge for a while, being part of the working group. So that knowledge should have been shared, and could have been shared a lot earlier than it has been today. That's that. And sorry, just going back to Mark's point, where you've got some people that clearly don't have the experience, and they're dealing with day-to-day issues for commercial operators that need to make money. They're a business and they need to make money. Cash flow is king. And what you've got, unfortunately, are people that are responsible for the decision-making and assessment of operational authorizations that lack the experience, which creates inefficiency in the service, because then they have to go and find somebody to get the answers. That takes time, and that's the time that commercial operators don't have. And that's contrary to the service that they expect from the CAA, especially with what they're being charged.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next topic, but actually before I do that, I just want to bring up a question or a statement rather from the chat from one of our channel members, from Dan the Drone Man, which I managed to bring up behind us all, which was very clever, Sean. Well done. For my next trick, I will make it appear. There we go. There we go. So it's an interesting conversation that sort of sparked off regarding, and I was talking before about the confusion that can happen at every level, and our audience is a fantastic mix of recreational pilots all the way through to OSC holders, etc., and even blue light workers, etc., operators. So it's interesting how the confusion can happen, because there's kind of a debate going on in the chat regarding open A3 subcategory, and Dan the Drone Man saying if anyone can find written rule that says a drone flying in the open A3 subcategory needs to be flown within 50 meters separation from uninvolved people, I will eat a salad. Well, Dan, you're probably quite safe in terms of the salad eating, because despite all of the levels of regulation that tell us about separations and everything else like that, it is, to my reasonably well-researched belief, that in legislation there is absolutely nothing that stipulates the separation distance for uninvolved people in the A3 category. And it's just one of those small issues that really does start to wind me up, from the point of view that we've got all this advice, all this guidance, all this everything else, but it's not based on the actual legislation, that was there. It's based on, just policy upon policy, basically. And
the remote pilot shall have a reasonable expectation that no uninvolved person in the operational flight area will be
unsafe or at risk, essentially, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah,
you nearly got it. Well done.
But no, there are no. I was looking at it last night. But no, there are no clearances. No, there aren't.
No,
but there are in the drone code, which makes for some fantastic conversations on Facebook.
It does, exactly. Because of course, part of the reason I feel that it feels more like a broken system, particularly towards the lower end, is because obviously it's the police that will be enforcing these rules, especially when fixed penalties come out and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But they're going to be enforcing legislation. The police aren't there necessarily unless it's part of a case and they have to bring up the drone code in court and everything else like that for guidance. But it isn't necessarily, it certainly isn't the drone code that an officer is going to arrest you under or
doing the flyer ID, because I did it over Christmas, is a real pain when you know the law.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't necessarily know the drone code.
Yes.
And you look at it, you think, hold on, well, I know the answer to this, but I don't think that's the answer they're looking for.
No, indeed. Okay, right.
So you give the answer they're looking. What does the headmaster want? That's the answer.
Indeed. Okay, right. The next topic, because the next two topics bring us on to one of my big questions. So, and this is around documentation, and it's really, the topics are two pronged, and both are of an incredible frustration to me at the moment. And indeed, the second part is actually what has brought about this series. But the first one is, does documentation matter? And over the past couple of years, Geeksvana has on numerous occasions given feedback to the CAA, leading to many changes in CAP documents, releases, and even actually the CAA drone code, as has Graham, even independently from that. We've both had changes with the drone code. what does this inconsistency tell us about the competency of the regulator, if anything at all, from the point of view really that we'll, we're going to be talking about the annual safety report and the accounts bit itself in a moment in terms of the misleading errors. But this is a point of frustration. And Mark, I brought it up to you in our one and only interview at DroneX in terms of, do you have people that whose job it is to proofread CAP documents before they went out? And as much as I didn't like your answer, I respected you for giving the answer that no, we do not have someone whose specific role, obviously at the time that you were there, it is to proofread these things. And it means that we've ended up with a situation where two paragraphs in a row in safety guidance produced by the CAA contradicts each other. And that to me just feels like a really, really serious point of view. So to us, again, as somebody who has just left regulation, I mean, how much does getting documentation correct, how do you feel that matters in the grand scheme of things?
Oh, hugely, I think, and it should be, and certainly was at the time, a point of significant embarrassment to any of us involved if something came out and was incorrect or had contradictions in it. I think maybe, and I'm speculating a bit here because I didn't work directly in policy, so I never had the pleasure of writing a CAP or anything like that myself. So I think one of the problems was that if you go right back to the primary legislation, if you look at the UAS implementing reg, and you look at Article 11, it's going to tell you how to risk assess your operation so that you can apply for an authorization. It's really simple. It's 6 paragraphs, six elements to it. And it tells you exactly what to do. But it's flexible enough that it doesn't try to pigeonhole you. It doesn't say, if using this aircraft and doing that, then you must do it this way. It gives you that opportunity, even as a layperson, perhaps, just to say, here is why I think it's safe. And that was one of the benefits of CAP 722A as well, in that its approach to using claim, argument, evidence to allow you to prove you're safe was as simple as writing a narrative. You could say, I claim I'm safe, I claim I have mitigated this risk, and here's why I think that is true. So you didn't have to worry about buzzwords or terminology or anything sort of along those lines. But then you add more to it, as we've said already. Now we have the AMC, we have the GM, we have the growing 722 in its 2022 incarnation, and then we have 722A in its various other subsections of 722 that all came along. You end up with so many things trying to cover every possible situation that might occur that undoubtedly errors are going to creep through.
But how can they? I don't necessarily. I accept that there's a lot of documentation, but this is the regulatory documentation of the airspace regulator. It's literally the final product. It's literally the items, the documents that everybody is going to read to interpret your guidance and to interpret regulation. So I do not accept that it's acceptable or that a certain amount of error is going to happen. Yes, perhaps a November on a page where it should say December or something like that. Okay. But when you have 2 paragraphs in the same CAP document that tell somebody to do something which is unsafe and then contradicts that information in the following paragraph, that to me is something which I feel is beyond acceptable, if that makes sense. That's
not an editorial error. That's not a spelling mistake or something. That is, I mean, you'd have to say it's incompetent. That sort of error should not be allowed to happen.
How with somebody with inner working experience up to a reasonably recent period, how can that kind of thing actually occur? Is it that there's literally one team will go in and cut and paste a paragraph in and just close it and won't even read the context either side? Or, I mean, how do these things physically happen?
Sure, they were built as shared documents, and often there were different areas being written by different groups or being handed over between various people to assess, but it tended to happen in areas of specialization. So nobody would necessarily write the entirety of a full chapter, but someone would be overall responsible for it. All I can think about, again, is it comes back perhaps to the fact that a lot of people who were perhaps involved in writing these documents at the time had very little real-world experience of what they were asking people to do. That's why Dan's comment about 50 meters in A3, I am certain there was one iteration of one document that did add 50 meters into Open A3 as well as 150 meters from any area where you might expect people to come along, which was unnecessary and also impractical to do in real life.
Mm.
But again, if that's written by somebody who has no experience of actually flying these sort of aircraft, or thinking, what is it like to go out and operate somewhere where I have to maintain good VLOS, be aware of my orientation, carry out my commercial objective as well, of course, and actually do it to the satisfaction of the client, but also have some methodology of seeing where everybody is and what's going on. So if they add an extra line in or something like that, it may seem like a safety point to them to say, keep 50 meters clear of people as well, but it doesn't work in real life. But without having done it for real, you can't tell.
Yes, indeed.
So, sorry.
No,
I've got to.
Please.
I can't. This is a fundamental problem, right? Like, we cannot have. We must not accept and tolerate the fact that the regulator isn't capable and doesn't have the knowledge, the skills, the experience, the capacity to create, and then accept the fact that documentation goes out which is contradictory, which is incorrect. It is full stop not good enough. And we should not, as an industry, accept it. Full stop. We've spent the last hour. Sorry, Graham, I'm going to crack on with this. We spent the last hour and 5 minutes as a group of 5 very experienced people in this industry, and we have debates offline, online about what certain things mean, what we can and can't do. Mark right now is saying, yeah, there are paragraphs that are contradictory. There are things written by some people that say certain things that, and this isn't getting at you, Mark, because you're not there anymore, right? But this is me direct to the CAA once again, like I did 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, and got put back in my box very firmly. If you do not grip this properly, one of you is going to end up in the dock, in the coroner's court, because you will have written or allowed to be released or created confusing regulation or guidance or whatever it might be, which is brought up as one of the primary factors behind an accident or an incident. That's the fundamental. Like, what are we doing even having this debate, guys? Like, if we're having this debate, and I'm sorry, Sean, this is probably going to cut straight through to the end of the thing where you're like, oh God, I wanted to ask the big question. So if you want to ask the big question, go for it. But
no,
fundamentally, if we are saying all of these things, there's too much to do, there's crazy regulations and documentation, there's not enough people, not enough experience, not enough money's being put here and not where it needs to be. We need to be turning around and saying, okay, fundamentally then, if all of this is going on, and Mark made the point himself earlier on, if the people who have been affected by this and are trying to operate under this don't understand what's going on, if they don't understand the regulations, I've got people inside the chat right now saying, I just ignore it, it's too confusing, so I'm just going to fly, and if I get caught, I get caught.
And therefore it's
green,
wrong
I'm going
by
to fly.
definition.
This is the problem that we are creating, that the CAA, not we, the CAA are creating, and the CAA need to grip it. And that leads you to the big question, are the CAA fit for purpose? By definition, no, because they aren't competent.
It has to decide whether or not the documents it's producing are important. If they are, then you put the effort in and you get them right, and you don't release them until they are right. If they're not, then let us know and we'll ignore them.
If it's too difficult to make that documentation,
it's too difficult. It's a regulator. As Matt said, the main tangible output is guidance documentation. It's what you produce. It's like Ford saying, "Sorry, we can't get cars right." I mean, some people would argue they can't, but
that's also
it's got to have systems in place. If you query documents, these documents, sometimes something will be done. Cap 2606, they were very quick. They jumped on it because I spent a weekend sending.
Now, I'm going to interrupt there because that will be a never-ending rant and an absolutely correct one. But yeah, go on, please, Richard.
If I may, just to bounce in, just very quickly, two quick points. Right, this is all about undermining confidence in the regulatory environment. The 2 points for me are: has there been an erosion of trust in the regulator? If so, that suggests actually they're being reactive and not proactive, which is really important. And the other one, which we've all touched on, is user confusion. Okay, we're talking about people that might be making unintentional breaches. because they're confused with respect to what they're
yes,
obligated.
which in actual fact, one of the CAP documents, if a YouTuber, I mean, I don't hold myself up as any kind of industry expert or anything else like that. I am a journalist on YouTube trying to get information out to my audience in terms of what the drone rules are, in terms of what the CAA mean when they type something, what happens in terms of when they that viewer will come into contact with a police officer. So hence we've made those videos. It frustrates the hell out of me when I have to, a new document comes out and it's very proudly sent over, or rather it used to be very proudly sent over before I started making videos like this, of course. And a very proud new document, here's the new release of this. And then I, as somebody not working full time on this, can within minutes, seconds sometimes, spot serious errors. And the one we're talking about with the contradictory paragraphs, ones with the contradictory paragraphs, are those are actual safety concerns. Those are actual risks in terms of somebody reading that in a CAP document and then going out and flying a 500-gram drone in a not very safe manner. And at that point we were talking about all sorts of types of drones. So it really was a safety issue from that point of view, and it frustrates me. This channel was not supposed to be a let's pull the CAA over the coals, which is why hence my next video in this series talking about my relationship with them, which is almost become a bit of a Dear John letter video, frankly, is really frustration, because we have become this when all I've ever wanted to do is gain the simple information. My viewers want to fly their drones. They want to do it like this. And then when we bring Graham on, this is how the professional side want to operate. And we either can't get answers or we're spotting errors, which my second part of this, and I did just want to bring up James Emery's point here, which is exactly what we've been talking about, saying that the laws should be clear enough to regulate users without the need for guidance and advice. I should not have to risk a chat with police as they don't like being told the actual law rather than advice. Indeed, and it's more than possible. And I've had emails and body cams sent to me, etc., from people who have had conversations with police. They've quoted the drone code at them, and the police are saying, "Well, that's not the legislation, so tough," or right. A piece of guidance document somewhere from the CAA, and the police officer quite rightly says, "Sorry, that's not my problem. My problem is the legislation, and I think you're breaching the legislation doing this." And that to me is where all of it breaks down. All of it all the walls start to tumble down, because you cannot, as James in the chat was saying, you cannot just go out for a simple flight with a drone. And if you can't do that, you certainly can't build a business in this space, open space or the specific side. Which of course leads me on to the second part of the documentation, which is the more serious side of things, which is where this channel, again, a YouTuber, we're not incredibly talented barristers or RAF pilots or anything else, former regulators, etc. I am a journalist who became registered as a journalist only to try and make sure I was doing this job correctly when the CAA made my life so complicated. We have spotted issues with the annual safety report, and of course, which of course is literally an annual safety report. You would hope out of all the documents that the airspace regulator, who is responsible for airspace safety, would get that correct. But then actually having a document sent to us in terms of justifying the increase in charges for OAs. The disco fee, actually having the precise paragraph pointed to us that ends up with potential legal action via a judicial review, because it's completely wrong, and it's not wrong again in the sense of it's an incorrect statement or there's been an error. It's a lie. It's an out and out lie. Yeah, it's not a typo. It is talking about 7,000 operations from 2020. That shouldn't be in a 2024 document. And 75,000 or whatever from a PwC report of drone flights. How does that even work? The two figures didn't even correlate. And that, with what Mark was saying in terms of the lack of knowledge. So actually the people putting these documents together possibly don't know. And certainly I think the team leader in charge of the annual safety report was in post for something like 2 weeks, I think the research found, coming across from an out of aviation post. So again, great. I think it's fantastic people get to move on in their careers, etc. But perhaps with this side of things, there needs to be more oversight. And it does start to come back to it. If we've got a lack of knowledge, we've got all these errors happening, is this something, do you feel, Mark, as somebody who is passionate enough to have left the CAA and still come on this YouTube channel to hear some of your former work pulled apart, do you feel like there is a safety issue at the UK CAA in terms of RPAS at the moment?
Yes, I think there probably is. I think it all roots back to the discussions about competence that we're having, in that the regulations are now at a stage where some of the internal members of the CAA themselves don't seem to necessarily understand them, based on some oversight reports I've seen quite recently, where perhaps one element of safety that's still there is there's more of a likelihood that they will just say no to something rather than let something they don't understand slip through. Yeah. But that, of course, makes life very difficult for us in the commercial space if we can't be sure that something will get there. But yeah, I think that the overall, the turnover that I've mentioned, the dilution of that team there, and the fact that I think it's probably the dilution of the team that has caused this, but the ability to start lots more in the way of proper external oversight and really getting out there and seeing what people are doing seems to have been so slow. Because we're talking in general about whether or not documentation matters. Now, I've spoken before about the concept of performance-based oversight, and the CAA is meant to be a performance-based regulator. So the concept there should be that what I write in my safety case is only one part of the puzzle. And what really matters is how I perform when I'm out there flying. If I don't follow my safety case, but I'm still safe, my performance is still adequate. So while I need to correct things in my safety case, it doesn't mean that I should instantly be thrown in jail or anything like that. So that oversight is not being conducted. And we've got some fairly high profile authorizations out there where you might look at it and think, this does not look particularly safe. And if you dig into exactly how that was authorized or the competence and experience of the people who are authorizing these things, you think, well, I can only imagine the pressure they must be under and the fact that they are looking at something they don't have the experience to handle. And this will all come up further, because my biggest worry in industry right now is if I look at a 15, 16, 17,000 pound bill for a higher sale authorization to come round, well, knowing some of the members of the team there, who has the experience to actually come out and look at what I'm doing now and tell me I'm doing it wrong? There's nobody who's experienced anything like the sort of stuff we're doing at this stage. And
that's right.
Only lead to safety issues.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, the documents have to be correct, because if they are misleading in any way, that that does undermine public trust, and there should be a degree of transparency so we can actually see what sits behind it, which is what we talked about last week. But the consequences of this for the wider drone industry are that investors, insurers, innovators, they all depend on reliable data to assess risk and look at new drone operations, right? If there are inaccuracies in official documents, that surely is going to hamper growth and erode confidence. Because if you can't assess risk as part of a business plan with respect to carrying out drone operations based upon the fact that the regulator is providing misleading documents, then how is the drone industry in the UK going to grow?
Yes, absolutely. And when do we get the drains up? When do we get the drains up in terms of knowing, okay, because again, very recently, the reason that the narrative has changed, and I explained this in our last show with the CAA, is because I feel like it's got serious to the point of misleading Parliament and public, and hence the more sensational, perhaps red top style titles and thumbnails on the channel regarding this. But it's because I feel like it is a genuine concern, because somebody needs to get this under grip. Somebody needs to go in and get the drains up and find out exactly what's happening. Say What Drone in the chat, one of our channel members is talking about letters to MPs, etc. And actually, in terms of a parliamentary inquiry, which is obviously writing to your MP, etc., and raising it that way is a route to that. We will be providing that. Richard is going to be providing a letter that at the final show of this series, which will be in about 2 weeks' time, we'll then be starting the campaign for everybody to write to their MP, whether they want to write based on the letter or download the letter and send that itself, so that we can try to get something. Yeah. I think you already knew, but yes.
I'm joking. We already talked about this.
I now volunteer him on air so he can't say no, basically. But
I think it's called being voluntold.
I think that's about 20 seconds work for you, though. I'm astonished at how you can turn around a letter that would take me about a year. Well, it takes me longer to read it than it does for you to produce them sometimes, which is really saying something.
You're very kind. Thank you.
But to me, I look over at Ofcom and I look over at that world in terms of competency and in terms of a regulator that seems to have it together, that seems to have a fairly complicated system that certainly is having to deal with new technology all the time, etc. And then it makes me sort of feel a little bit envious and wonder if actually is lower airspace regulation within the aviation regulator, is that the way to go for the UK at the moment? Because we are so unique, because we do have we don't have the EASA tie-ins anymore, etc. Anything of that holding us back. Is it an idea to actually have a separate airspace regulator that then works in a lower airspace regulator that then works in conjunction with the CAA, but is a separate body? Does anybody think that could work?
The CAA aren't capable of doing it at the moment, are they? We've established that, I think, fairly firmly. So yes, we need a competent regulator that manages the regulatory framework for the lower airspace region in the UK. Absolutely.
I think everybody here at the moment, contrary to what some people in the CAA think, are all pro-regulation.
Steady.
We're not necessarily pro CAA. I'm completely agnostic. I don't care what you call something. If it's got to be regulated, it's just got to be regulated well, please. That's all we want. We want competent regulation. And if the CAA can do that, if the current team can do that, brilliant. Come on, step up, give us your best game, and we'll see if we can find any errors in the next document. We will. We will find them.
And people quite rightly are stating that yes, there are issues with Ofcom, and Mike saying another layer, Geeksvana, really. No, it wouldn't be another layer. This would be a simplification of everything. Remove ANCGM, have a drone code that's actually based on legislation, so that, again, because the new users coming in using the drone code, they're basing their flights that aren't on legislation. Then 6 months, 12 months later, they're getting more interested and they want to start work with it. They go into the Facebook groups, they go out there into the forums to get advice and find out some of what they know actually isn't the law, and it's all they've been doing is following the advice.
Even a little while ago, I would have said that it's not feasible, the idea of having a second regulator or a sub-regulator or something like that.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I think fundamentally, looking to the future, when we get to the stage of much more complex RPAS and aircraft that are fitting in with existing commercial air transport and things along those lines, that's got to fall to something like the CAA. So the certified category stuff must sort of stay where it is. But on the other hand, when you look at the more hobbyist-oriented areas of general aviation now, look at the success of British skydiving or the British Gliding Association and organisations like that, where there's a fundamental close link relationship with the CAA, but devolved regulation to allow them to help regulate their own communities because they have the expertise. So the question about drones would maybe be, do we have the opportunity to form something like that, a society that has the breadth of knowledge across perhaps the lower end, maybe even just open category, to look after the hobbyist world and the low end commercial world, to be able to look after things there and have one entity that is overseen by the CAA that takes on responsibility for a lot of the rest of the community.
Yes,
there are some natural splits. There are, specific category below 25 kilo is a natural split, below which you might say, okay, below 400 foot. If you want to go above 400 foot or above 500 foot or above a certain level, then you might say, okay, it's no longer a tall ladder, which is essentially what a lot of drones are used as. They're mobile platforms and ladders.
They're camera on a stick to many people.
They're putting the camera a bit higher up. And yes, we know they can interface with aircraft, and we know all that, just as aircraft can interface with the ground and have, with disastrous results. But the level we've got ourselves to now, as I think we've probably agreed around here, is completely disproportionate level of regulation at that lower end.
Yes. No, indeed, and it's and we are probably the wrong end of the funding cycle to hope for anything like a separate regulator. So it really does become a thought exercise. But obviously, what we do need to see is the drains coming up and something changing at the existing regulator.
It actually doesn't, though. It doesn't become a thought exercise, because I did all of the calculations and a business plan for this again back in 2019, 2020, and was laughed out of the room by the CAA. And someone said, "Oh, have you got letters and stuff?" I put an email out there. The video is probably still on the channel somewhere, or discussed it with Sean at some point. I said, I set up an email if people were interested in doing this. I set up a template letter that people could download, and out of the 19,000 people who saw that video at the time, within a couple of days, I had 4 people reach out. So I think we're in a very much a different place now in terms of people being frustrated with the regulator, and potentially being able to now see what it was that I could kind of see coming down the tracks. Because I've been in it for so long at that time.
I think something else has changed, though.
Go on, sorry then.
I think the change that's happened now is these are all of the things that you were talking about are very serious issues, but they're issues that are a problem to us as user as the user base. So as Mark's saying, actually that probably doesn't even include most of the CAA themselves. But actually, we've now reached a point where things like the annual accounts being put out in such a flagrant manner, we need to know where else those claims have been made, and what other funding requests and what other applications and documentation floating around government have those misleading figures, those completely inaccurate figures, as the CAA themselves admit. So perhaps this time it's also a little bit more serious, if that makes sense, from the point of view that we have the misleading Parliament and public thing there. And then, yes, once you then start to get those drains up, perhaps that's something that MPs will listen to more, and will get more people motivated. And then once the drains are up, I keep using that analogy, sorry, then perhaps other things will come to light as well, and we'll get the other changes. Because we need something to be the pivot. We need something to be the brick wall that stops all of this and allows us to start travelling in the right direction. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But it's one of those where, if you take the revenue stream, and that's not going to go down well at the CAA, right, and potentially the DFT, that revenue stream would disappear. But actually, if that revenue stream is designed for what it's designed for, which is to get the regulations on track, to maintain those regulations at an acceptable level, to an acceptable standard that would stand up in court, if required, but also makes sense to everyone and enables the future. It enables business, which is one of the prerequisites that the CAA are supposed to adhere to.
Yes.
All of a sudden, then, actually, you could make a very streamlined, very process-driven, very automated, but safe and controllable and standardized way to give people an appropriate amount of training depending on the amount of risk that they are going to place upon themselves and other people potentially, and a very much self-funding, including all of the comms and all of that, all of the PR work that needs to come within that. And it's interesting, I got Rob Markwell in the chat saying legally that would be very challenging due to the CAA Act, would need a whole new SI through Parliament. I almost disagree in a way, because actually, as a democracy, if that's what we decide, that's what the majority of people decide they want to happen, actually, there shouldn't really be a political slant on that. We've identified that there's a problem. We've identified that there's a solution. If the majority of people want that to happen, those acts and things are there not to protect and stonewall the CAA and the way that they do things, or any organisation. They're there to be potentially challenged through things like JRs, as I understand it, Richard, right? If you have to.
Yeah, and Matt,
what's to stop someone writing an SI and proposing it?
Well, that's right to a degree. I mean, if you look at legislation throughout history, it's usually a reflection of what was important politically at that time, which is why you've had that regulation, right? The Civil Aviation Act is the one that gives the CAA authority, and that's obviously sponsored by the DFT, Department for Transport. But the Department for Transport, it's not impossible, could legislate an amendment to the Civil Aviation Act or UTMA, the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act, to mandate that there should be a separate body set up for drone operations, per se, but that could also include manufacturers, operators, commercial entities, and recreational users. But the key benefit I see of doing something like that, and it does mean sponsoring legislation and everything else, that's where the complexity gets in, and a letter to your MP will always be helpful for that. But the key benefit I see is that the CAA is a regulator that's grown out of manned aviation, has been in play for over 100 years, and has become very big. Some might argue bloated and inefficient. And if we were to adopt something around drones only or unmanned aircraft only, what we're talking about is something that's going to be more agile, more flexible, and able to adapt quickly to the ever-evolving change in technology we see today. And I think that's a real key advantage here, because what we're seeing is legislation always has a problem keeping up with technology. It's always behind the curve. And we're now seeing that more and more. I mean, look, the AI Act that came into the EU last year was really proactive legislation. The EU is the only one to put in the AI Act. The UK doesn't have anything like that. Where is this proactive ability to look at how we can make regulation much more agile and flexible to enable good use cases for this kind of technology? Really, we should have stolen a march from Europe. And I said this back in Brexit. We should have just cherry-picked what we needed. And everybody from Europe that wanted to test their drones and all of their operations should have come over here. And we've created a fascinating and large market around this industry.
As it is, we've got the opposite. We've got people flooding out to go and find somewhere where they can fly BV.
Yes, even for contracts, with our own military, of course, having to go to Turkey, etc. And it's what Matt is what Matt is saying in terms of actually, Sean, yes, this could happen. Again, yes, it can. Of course, we've also been told in the most recent general RPAS public consultation that the reason they're doing that is because we are in a unique position that we can kind of do whatever the UK wants now and the UK needs. So perhaps that does need looking more deeply. But we will be bringing more to you in terms of what we're going to be doing in terms of the letter writing and that side of the campaign, because we can't give up on it, frankly. That's the only other option here. And bringing a group like we have this evening on the panel together, who's perhaps aren't naturally people that would be hanging out on a Monday evening together. So thank you guys for coming along. This shows just how much passion there is out there and how much concern there is that something needs to change and that something needs to happen. And the more times we do this, then hopefully the more the closer we will come to somebody listening or some change. I don't want to just sit here with us all being able to say, we told you so. We genuinely want these things to happen, which is why we've always been so open to communicating with the CAA, no matter how much they annoy me, frankly. And recently they have really done that. So there are a couple of other topics on there, which we're actually going to leave for the next one whenever we do one of these panels again. I look forward to seeing what comes of this. Last time, I think, Matt, it was a fairly life-changing and lengthy legal process that I managed to drop you in the middle of from a Geeksvana live stream. So I certainly hope that doesn't happen to anybody, including myself. Thank you.
This is me waving goodbye to my OFC-based OA renewal.
But this is part of it, right? Like this is part of the problem. Is that overreach, the not putting the resources into the right place. Like, why reach out to someone who is trying to help and say, guys, come on, improve the comms? When
I've got an email thread with a veiled threat.
It's terrible. Just get on with your job and do it properly, rather than worrying about the carnage you're leaving in the rearview mirror. Yeah.
It's strange, actually. My conversations in terms of and obviously I've had conversations with various people in the CAA. They have changed from the early days when I first came across Jonathan Nicholson, the amazing Jonathan Nicholson, at a trade show, and that started my conversations and my relationship with the CAA. And it was always extremely simple because he is a model flyer himself. He has an awful lot of experience within the CAA. He knows what he's talking about across so many subject matters, including unmanned. And when he doesn't know, he will also say. They went from having conversations like that with people like him and people like Callum, and even trying to chase Mark Wharry through DroneX, etc. But it was still fun. I knew I was chasing after people that had some answers for me. that's now become very slowly and more recently, very quickly, a corporate comms nightmare from the point of view of you mention this on air, or you do this, or you do that, or even Mark, as you know from the our first interview that we put out regarding the remote ID and pilot location, was just a discussion about whether or not you felt pilot location was necessary. And within a couple of hours of that going out, I received a very long threatening email from the media lead at the CAA, basically telling me that I had misconstrued the story. And focused on the wrong story. When of course all we've done is of course produce someone's words out there. So even that side of things has become so convoluted and so far away from the actual conversations of what is remote ID going to be, and the answer is more than acceptable to say we don't know. But actually, when someone does give you an answer, it's almost I didn't air the rest of that interview because of that email, basically, because just putting out someone's comments on something on one particular topic created a bleep storm for the channel to have to deal with in terms of responding to a complaint, and that frustrates me because it means the flow of information has changed, the flow of information has been corrupted. But perhaps, Mark, that's also an indication of having less people in those stations that know what they're talking about, to be able to have the technical experience to be able to answer the questions as well.
It might well be. I mean, I've not experienced that side of things yet, and as a now customer of my previous employer, perhaps I will. But I did find it interesting when working with another organisation recently, who'd received one of these oversight reports they couldn't come out with. I gave them some advice on not how to push back aggressively or unpleasantly or anything like that, but how basically to push back and say, I think you've got this wrong, CAA. I think you've interpreted that wrong. And I think what I'm doing is fundamentally safe and effective, and you should stop this. And they said to me they didn't want to do that because they thought the power the CAA held over them was too much, and they didn't want to offend the wrong person.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that is not the way any professional organization should work. Now, I'm not implying that the CAA does work that way. I hope that for the next oversight report I personally receive, I can argue back if I think they've misconstrued something or they've got something wrong in it, and have a collaborative and productive conversation. Maybe I'm being naive, but that's what I would aim for there.
Good luck.
But the point is there are customers of the CAA out there now who think that's not an option. If I don't go cap in hand and say, I'm really sorry, just tell me what you want me to write, then they will get blackballed effectively, and that's a terrible situation to be in.
Well, or their permission delayed. I've spoken to a few operators, Mark, where if I raise a question now or raise an issue with respect to what I've submitted, they're just going to delay it. I can't afford that. I'm a commercial operator. This is really going to hurt my business.
Route to success for me is maybe what you're looking at there. And now delays. Part of me wonders, do these delays come because some of the operations that are being put forward now are beyond the experience levels of some of the inspectorate, and therefore they don't know how to answer something or how to assess something, and therefore the process just grinds to a halt. It used to be perhaps if they had a point of escalation who had more experience, they could go there, but I know a lot of the engineering and operationally experienced guys that I used to work with have moved on. So I'm not sure what's there now in terms of points of escalation where they can say, I don't understand this. Can you help me?
It's not an excuse, though. It's not an excuse, though, for not being able to deliver
damning.
It, right?
Yeah, it's damning.
It's just more evidence that they're not fit for purpose in their current guise.
The recruitment, the way the team is built, is not doing what it should do, if that's the case. But I am speculating a bit, but you're right. Yeah. It must be designed so they do have points of escalation. But, I will remember that when I left the CAA, I did look at other roles that might have been available for me there. And I was told in one of my final meetings that the skill set I brought as an ex-RAF examiner, etc., were not required by the CAA.
I mean, I can only laugh at that for it being so embarrassing, really, Mark.
Not for you. I thought, well, if the CAA have decided that my skill set is not what they want, then that's good. At least I know where I'm going. But I did think perhaps they will need these skill sets in the future.
Yeah.
And another point around comms and about people feeling operational authorization holders feeling nervous about what they say, etc., is just this: putting a show together like this I needed to gain legal clearance for this, just to have an open debate about the airspace regulator and the work they're doing, based on lots and lots of evidence that we already hold, which obviously it cleared, hence we're on air. But there are not enough conversations of this type happening, because they seem to shut those down, like they did with Matt and like in many other situations, because they just don't want to have these debates in open, because they know they're going to be found wanting. And whether that's from experience or just through straightforward incompetence, it's just not acceptable. And that's another reason why the show tonight has been so important. And I want to thank everybody for coming on. We could continue this on for about 5 hours, because it's something that we all believe so passionately in. But I understand our audience has a sponge, and we've probably filled that about half an hour ago, actually. But we didn't even really get Graham going.
They have done well.
Indeed, exactly.
This lot.
Yes. Well, we've actually kept very consistent numbers, actually. So thank you, everybody. We're told so much that regulation isn't something people want to talk about, and it's great to see you all here. Please do hit that like button before you leave. But I want to thank everybody for being here. Mark, thank you for braving your first live visit to the channel. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being open to the questions that are put to you.
Let's get more.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, we need more of this kind of thing. So I really appreciate you joining us. What was that, Matt?
More. We just need more of it.
More. Yes, we need more conversations. Exactly.
Yeah,
more debate.
People chatting and talking about it, because it's only by doing that we find out that in the chat there's already been 7 or 8 people, I think, that have said, "Oh, the CA have sent me legal stuff as well to stop me from saying
That's
things."
right.
You're like,
that's right.
Yeah.
What?
I can't believe you've not called me, Mark. What's going on?
Yeah.
Come on, sort it
The link is in the description, people.
We're going to tie up. We're trying to get together for a while.
Excellent. Okay, well, as ever, Geeksvana is here to bring people together and to have these conversations out loud. We will continue to do that. Keep an eye out for the next video and live show in this series. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon. And Sean out. Bye-bye.